Before factories, before freeways, before this was even America, this land was already at war. And the name Pontiac, it doesn't come from a car. It comes from a man who fought an empire to keep this land from being taken. We usually tell the story of this region starting in the 1900s. Assembly lines, steel, engines, the rise of the Motor City. But that's not where this story begins. Because long before Detroit became industrial, and long before Pontiac became a factory town, this land was already the center of something else. A fight. A fight for control. A fight for survival. A fight over who this place belonged to. And at the center of that fight was a man that history remembers as Pontiac. Not a chief in the European sense, but a war leader who united nations and nearly changed the future of this entire region. This isn't just history. It's the first version of a pattern that never really stopped repeating. Before there were roads, before there were borders, this region was already connected. Rivers, lakes, trails carved over generations. The Great Lakes weren't just scenery. They were everything. Transportation, trade, survival. Indigenous nations controlled this land for centuries, moving through it, living with it, understanding it in a way that settlers never fully would. Then, in 1701, everything started to change. A French officer named Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac established a fort right along the Detroit River. Not randomly, strategically, because whoever controlled that water controlled movement, controlled trade, controlled power. Detroit wasn't built for industry. It was built for control. By the early 1760s, the French were gone. The British had taken control after the French and Indian War, and everything changed for the people who had lived here long before them. Trade became stricter. Alliances weakened. Respect disappeared. And in 1763, something broke. Pontiac, an Ottawa war leader, began organizing something that no one expected. Not just resistance, coordination. He united multiple tribes across the Great Lakes region and launched a series of attacks on British forts, one after another. And then, he set his sights on Detroit. This wasn't a random uprising. This was one of the most organized indigenous resistance efforts in North American history. And for the British, it was a real threat. In 1763, Pontiac and his forces surrounded Detroit, cutting it off, waiting, watching. For over 5 months, the British fort held on, barely. Supplies ran low, tensions stayed high. Every movement mattered. This wasn't a quick battle. It was pressure, constant, quiet. And while the British ultimately held the fort, they didn't walk away untouched. Because this moment proved something. This land wasn't easily controlled, and the people fighting for it weren't going anywhere quietly. The war ended, but not the story, because control didn't disappear. It just changed hands. After Pontiac's War, the British adjusted how they dealt with native nations, but the outcome still moved in one direction: expansion. Eventually, American control replaced British control, and indigenous influence over the land was pushed further and further out. What had once been contested territory opened up for settlement, for development, for something new. And slowly, the purpose of this land changed, from survival to production. By the early 1900s, Detroit became something else entirely: the global center of the auto industry. Steel, speed, mass production. And Pontiac, named in 1818 after the very man who fought to protect this land, became part of that machine. Factories replaced forests. Assembly lines replaced battle lines. The same rivers that once carried war canoes now carried materials. The same land that saw conflict now powered an economy. It looked like progress, and in many ways, it was. But if you zoom out, the pattern didn't change. Power rises, then shifts, and by the late 20th century, that industrial dominance began to fade. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, communities felt it. This time, the fight wasn't over land. It was economic. But the result felt familiar: loss, transition, uncertainty. Today, most people drive through Pontiac or Detroit without thinking about where the names come from, without thinking about what happened here before the factories, before the roads, before any of it. But the story is still here, in the land, in the water, in the name: Pontiac, a name tied to resistance, to conflict, to a moment where control was challenged. And in a strange way, that story never really ended. It just changed form, from war to industry to reinvention. The land stayed, the name stayed, but the meaning, that keeps evolving. If you grew up around here, or you've spent time in Pontiac or Detroit, what did you know about this story? And what didn't you? Drop it in the comments, because sometimes the places we think we know best have stories we've never really heard.